Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. Cara is a mom of two to Owen, who was born in June of 2018, Sloane, who was born in February of 2023, and she resides in Groveland. She is currently on maternity leave and after having her second baby in February of 2023 and is navigating another return to work situation in the tech industry. Cara has worked for large tech industry companies, largely focusing on robotics for the last 14 years, and has navigated birth, postpartum, and her first return to work when maternity leave benefits were lacking in 2018, and this time when they are a bit more generous after having Sloane. She's passionate about helping other moms rejoin the workforce after having a baby and is a strong advocate for moms in the workplace. Yay, Cara, I'm excited to have you today and to have you share your birth and postpartum story for the listeners and kind of continue our series here. I'm excited. I would love if you want to just kind of jump right in and tell us a little bit about you and maybe what life kind of looked like pre any babies and kind of how you guys decided to get going and end up where you are in the world and end up with Owen.
Yeah, definitely. So, it's always interesting to hear somebody read your intro.
Right.
But yeah, so before having kids, actually, I worked for about, 8 years, I want to say, in the tech industry. So I'm originally from North Dakota. I kind of made this big move out to Massachusetts for work back in 2009, I want to say. And largely it was just my husband and I and our dogs. And for a long time, I thought, I don't want to have kids. I just want to have dogs, right? I was one of those people. But I don't know, I hit my early 30s, and I was like, gosh, like something's missing, right? Work is great, but I was working, long hours, just like striving in the office, right? And I kind of missed, having a little one around. Growing up, I had a huge family back home, just like literally hundreds of cousins. I babysat for them a lot. Yeah. And I don't know, something clicked for me in my 30s, and we decided to try having kids. And I was a little terrified just because most of my network out here wasn't family, right? It was like work acquaintances, and everybody was just like striving to, move up in the workplace. It was like very different, situation at the time. So I knew kind of going in, I had to find somebody around that was going to help me. So I know back in like 2008, I didn't even know what a doula was, right? And I remember just Googling, how do I find pregnancy support? Because I knew at the time, like my parents, they were in New Mexico, like our family's kind of scattered all over. And so my thought was, can I find somebody that will just be in the hospital with me, right? I know my husband will be there, but we don't even know what to expect, right?
Right.
So, here's me Googling all of these things, and I found a local doula in, I think, Amesbury. And so, as soon as I found out I was pregnant almost, I called her and I was just like, hey, I think I need some help. Like, what do you do? And she kind of explained the process to me, and it sounded amazing. I was like, oh my gosh, I have this person who can teach me about birth, right? Because I knew nothing at the time. And just like what to expect, and kind of have the lens of like, what actually does happen, right? Because as an Instagram scroller, at the time you see all these like, oh, it's this great experience and everything else. And so what we decided to do with this doula is have, the birth education. So we took the newborn classes and all the things, because I'm an extra special planner.
I get it. Me too.
And so I took all the courses, and again, still did not know what to expect, right? They show you that, what is it, the wheel of how your cervix dilates?
Yeah.
Seeing the 10 centimeters and going, oh my God, how the heck am I going to do this? Right.
Right.
Because I'm kind of a small person. And so just seeing that wheel, there was some anxiety, right? So for me, it was all about let's be prepared. But obviously, going in, you can never really be prepared because you never know what's gonna happen.
Right.
So, we had all the education. I had this doula lined up who she was amazing, by the way. Like Ellie Lindenmeyer, I don't know if you know her, but I don't know if she still does it, honestly. But she was great. And we had the same sort of personality of just like very matter of fact, like here are the facts and here's what to expect. And I needed that kind of process, right? That was my
Mm-hmm.
getting the mindset. So I know I was like prepared as could be, like ready, or thought I was ready. And we get to the end of the pregnancy, and I was learning what my benefits were. At the time, I had started a new company, and I unfortunately hadn't been there for a year yet. I think I missed the year cutoff by 2 weeks.
Oh,
They had a very generous maternity package, but for people who worked there for a year or more, right? So going in, I knew I only got, what was it, 8 weeks? And then I took 2 weeks of PTO because you had to bank the PTO and all the
yep.
things. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, is this going to be like a career killer? Right. What am I going to do? And going in, I know like I didn't have the best supportive boss. I know he was like an older gentleman. It was a small group that I was working in. We were just kind of starting like a new systems engineering group within the organization.
Hmm.
And so, it was kind of career wise, like a very uncertain time. But then also, I'm bringing in this, like, I'm going to have a baby. I'm going to be gone for a while. What do I do?
Yep.
Type of thing. And I work with all men, right? So I think a lot of them were just like, I don't know what to do here in this
Right.
situation. Like, go have your time with your family and like come back, right? So I had that kind of swirling in the background. And I was like, oh, it'll be fine. I heard from a few other moms in the workplace that it was okay and things like that, but they didn't have a pump room at the time, right? Coming back. So we had to kind of navigate that. Luckily, I had some moms who also were pregnant in the workplace around the same time as me who came back before me who were able to kind of navigate that. But it was weird. I didn't know what to do, right? And of course, me being the planner that I am, I was like, okay, I think there's going to be a pump room eventually. I don't know what pumping looks like, but I'll figure it out, right?
Right.
Go from there. So back to the pregnancy. So it was pretty uneventful, except towards the end. I just, it was huge. It was June. It was 2018 was like a really hot year for some reason. I
Yeah.
just remember our AC went out a couple times. I was just like cranky towards the end. And Owen ended up being, again, like late, right? This due date, this estimate date is like a thing, right? So he was like 6 days after his due date, right? So, here I have my relatives. Oh, he'll be early. My mom was like, oh, you guys were early. He'll
Yep.
be early, right? So here I am, June 18th was his due date, right? And I'm like, a couple weeks before waiting and waiting and didn't come. I just remember being like sweaty and pregnant and just like not wanting to do anything. But the one thing that I did do is I I researched my insurance benefits and I found out at the time you could do prenatal massages and like some other kind of things. So was doing acupuncture just because I had so much anxiety around this birth, just to like calm myself down. So I set aside some money to do that. And again, very fortunate to be able to do that at the time, right? But honestly, it helped, right? So I did the education, I was doing acupuncture and massage. I was trying to just do it all, right? Because
Yeah.
I thought if I do all these things, it'll help me, right? Prepare for the birth, right? So, 6 days after his due date, he comes. My water breaks at home. It was funny. The acupuncture place that I went to also did traditional Chinese medicine. And they did this, they would make you like customize herbal blends and things like that.
Oh,
I know. And so I was like, hey, it's hot. I want to have him out of me. Like, how do I do this? Do you have recommendations for like something I could take? So they made me this like tea. And I remember taking it. It was the most disgusting thing ever. But I brewed some tea at home and I remember like because I was so uncomfortable. I had all the furniture like in our living room, just like lots of different chairs that I had bought because I just couldn't get comfortable. And I kind of like tripped over this chair. I had my tea. I sit down and my water broke
Oh my gosh.
at home. Yeah, and it was like a weekend because I was so afraid. My husband was still going into work. I didn't want to go into labor at home by myself, right? Because I was like at home. I wasn't going into the office and I was kind of like afraid of this happening. So luckily the stars aligned and my husband was home. My water breaks. I'm so excited. I'm like, we have to go to the hospital. And there was meconium in the the water or whatever. And I was kind of freaked out because again, like I had birth training, but I didn't know that this could happen, right?
Right.
So I call my doula, I call the OB, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're gonna have to come in. We're gonna monitor you." And I said, "Okay." So I had my bags packed ahead of time, of course, and all the things. So we go in, and I think it's like a Saturday afternoon, and I was contracting, but I couldn't feel the contractions at that point. So we get in, they were doing every hour monitoring me. Eric was like leaving to get food and things like that. We're in the I'm just like, when is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? And I remember like it was middle of the night. They just woke me up to like monitor me again. And I started feeling the contractions, right? And I was like, oh, this is kind of manageable. It's fine. But then, I mean, again, like I feel like when you're in the middle of labor, you just have no concept of time. So I couldn't tell you like how long between like when I felt them and when all of a sudden it was like intense. I
Hmm.
honestly have no
You're in a
idea.
daze.
Right. So I just remember they came to check on me. I was like, I couldn't breathe through the contractions anymore. It was just like very intense. And I remember yelling at my husband, call Ellie now. She has to come, like hurry, get her here, right? Because I just wanted someone there to tell me it was going to be okay.
Yeah.
Really, it was like all I wanted. So again, it was kind of a blur, but I had about 10 hours of labor. I don't remember most of it. I mean, it was intense, right? I remember just like pressure. I remember like the birth, like him coming out. I just remember and pushing for about 2 hours, and that was very, very, very intense. And so, the birth happened. He was healthy. He was 8 pounds. It was great. I loved that the doula took pictures. And yes, there was like a ton of blood, but I was like, what does the placenta look like? So the midwife who delivered Owen was awesome. I'm actually really glad that she happened to be on call that day because I remember she was new to the practice. I loved her. Her name was Meredith. I think she left the practice, but she actually stayed her shift to help me because I was determined to go natural. I didn't want to have an epidural. I wanted nothing. I was like, I don't want anything. I can do this on my own. And I did,
You did.
which was awesome, but also a little terrifying because I just remember afterwards, it felt like I had ran like 3 marathons and I just laid in bed for like 2 days. I couldn't get up um, because I
All
had
the energy.
yeah, it was 10 hours. I remember being so sweaty. There's like pictures of me, my hair is like drenched. Like I'm just completely naked because I was like, get everything off of me, turn the AC down. It was just like so warm, right? It was like, I don't know, it was June, it was hot, humid. I think the AC in the room was like down to 64. People were in like sweatshirts because it was so cold. And I had a fan going on me because I was like so hot, just in the middle of like, what is it called? The transition, right? Where you
Yep.
go like between, just the intense part of labor, right? So I really remember kind of like those key things, but also just having that support person in the room, like, oh yeah, this is normal. You expect this next, like keep pushing. Like, how do you breathe through pushing, right? Because you can talk about it all you want, but like in the heat of the moment, it's like, how the heck do you do this? Right. Like, I
Right.
don't know. So having her there, just like helping me through that was instrumental, really. Especially because it was like 2 long hours of that. But he was super healthy for the most part. I think they were worried about his blood sugar because he had some kind of little I don't know, shudder that he did or something when he came out. But yeah, he was 8 pounds, healthy little boy, which was awesome. And I just remember being both relieved, but also just like super emotional. And I'm not a really emotional person. So when they put him on me, I cried, right, which I never do. So it was this weird experience, right, of this like little human on your chest, like you're bleeding. They're like sticking you with needles to like numb you and stuff, but you're just like, I don't care, sew me up, right? Uh,
Right.
and just having him look at me for the first time was just like one of the craziest things I've ever experienced in my life. And so here he was, Owen, seeing my husband just like look at him too was like pretty amazing to know that like we made this little human and things like that. So the
So
birth was
cool.
great. We stayed in the hospital for 6 days just because one, my blood pressure was so low. I couldn't stand up. So they didn't really want me to go home afterwards. And then Owen had some issues with his blood sugar. So they were like pricking his little feet all the time and things like that. And, being in the hospital was like a double-edged sword. It was great. They fed me, like there was somebody there to help me. Figuring out how to breastfeed for the first time was challenging. But it was also kind of interesting because they were sort of pushing the breastfeeding on you. Not that I didn't want to breastfeed, but it was like they were scaring you a little bit of like, you have to breastfeed, like this is what's going to happen. And they brought like a pump in because my milk hadn't come in. And it was just this like anxiety inducing thing for me of like, the pump is here, you shall pump, having the nurses like always tell you, because we had to use donor milk and a little bit of formula at the beginning just because of his blood sugar. And so, we did that. It was all fun and good. And then all of a sudden they're like, okay, here, time to go home. We're just charging you. And I was like, okay, now what do I do? Right.
Right.
6 days later, we come home. So Eric at the time only got 2 weeks of paternity leave. So we burned the first week in the hospital, right? Pretty
Right.
much. And then the second week, he was helping and so on and so forth. And I tried to prep by making some like freezer meals and stuff, but I'm a terrible cook, so they were not great. And it was just like, not... So, he, we get through kind of the honeymoon phase of like, I have this newborn at home. I kind of know what to expect. I'm like breastfeeding. And all of a sudden, Eric has to go back to work, right? So he's like, all right, see you later. I remember
Oh
it
my
was like Monday or
gosh.
something. And I have a picture of myself like on that day. And I had been just like crying and I'm holding this newborn and I'm just like, what in the F do I do now? Right. Like,
Right.
um, I had this like plantar fasciitis from pregnancy. I was in a lot of pain walking around. So I was kind of like grounded almost to the first floor of my house. I couldn't really go up and down the stairs very well because I was in a lot of pain. I had stitches because I tore. I think I got like a third-degree tear. And I was tired, I was dehydrated, and I had this like foot pain. So I was like taking it was like ibuprofen, like nonstop, just like trying to figure out how the heck to do this with a newborn. We also had dogs at the time, like two huge 120-pound dogs.
Oh my gosh.
And the dogs like would hear the baby cry and they would freak out, right? So I have this like extra anxiety because I'm home with dogs and a baby. Okay. And I think I did it for 2 days and I was just breaking down because it's like you're up every 2 hours trying to like get, and I didn't have anybody, right? And I'm like, what in the heck am I supposed to do? It was great. I had this doula for the birth, but nobody talked about at the time what you do after.
Right.
And I was just like, oh my God. I have this person. I can't even like feed myself. I can barely walk around. What in the hell am I supposed to do? So I remember calling my mom on the phone and just bawling. And I was like, what am I supposed to do? Like, what, like, just, I've
Yeah.
been this like independent person. I could do everything on my own, right? And that's how I did it. And I didn't like to ask for help, right? So here I am with this newborn. Eric's at work and, he's working like an hour and a half away. I think he was going into Cambridge at the time. So it's not like he could like come home and help. And this was
Right.
pre-pandemic. So everyone's like in their
In the
office.
office.
Uh, So my mom came up and stayed with me for a while just to help me like get around the house, like cook,
Yeah.
things like that. And then I think she was here for 3 weeks, I want to say, helping out. And then again, it was like, you're on your own, right? Eric's back at work. Here I am. And at the time, I was such a Googler. I'm like, how do I make mom friends? Like literally, like I don't know how to do this.
Yes. Yeah,
So I found the Peanut app, which I think is still around today.
it
Um,
is.
but you have to pay for it now, which I'm kind of disappointed about. Like you have
That
to
kind of defeats the purpose of meeting people, right?
exactly. So, but anyway, I was like on Peanut, it's like you swipe right, you swipe or up and down, I think it is, right? For like the moms that you want to meet. And luckily I had found, I think like a handful of moms who, one of them I still am in contact with today, who had a little boy in May. So that our little boys were about the same age and they lived less than a block away from us.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
so I just started like stroller walking with these moms and it was like, almost like dating, right? And, we're telling our birth stories and what do you do about this? Like, is your baby taking the bottle? Like, how does this happen? And just, me being able to get out after the fact and do that was instrumental for just my mental health and everything else. I mean, I think with my son, I honestly think in the first couple of weeks I had some postpartum depression. Probably undiagnosed. I didn't even know it was a thing at the
Okay.
time, honestly. And so I just remember it was hard to get up. I had him next to me. I just laid in bed for like days. I was crying. I didn't know, is my milk in? Is my milk not in? Am I supposed to pump through this? I remember calling the doula a couple times because she was also a lactation consultant and just being like, is my milk in? I can't tell. I'm pumping a few ounces. Is that okay? Right? Because I had no idea.
You don't know. Yeah.
And I just felt like a mess all the time. So, but again, like just me kind of like forcing myself to get out there and, walk with these moms. And again, it's nice to know that a lot of them are still like Owen's friends today, right? Some of them
Yeah.
will go to school with him, which is nice. Like they're local to the town and things like that. So it's nice. We lucked out in the sense that, there's Facebook and this Peanut app and everybody was kind of like digital and I'm just
Yeah.
grateful that we were able to do that. So anyway, that was maternity leave. And I know it's like 10:30, so
No, you're okay. No, you're perfect. And I honestly like just you talking
Mhm.
about just this whole first part of it and like, having these other people is amazing because it's just that relatability aspect of things, right? Like
Yeah.
being able to have people to talk to that get it, right?
Yeah.
And then like even more so just talking about it and being like, I didn't know what to expect postpartum, and like that's such a huge part of like behind this whole podcast as a whole because nobody really talks about it, right? Like we all take the birth classes and we all take the newborn care classes, but like postpartum, what are we supposed to do? We focus so
Right.
much on that birth because
Right.
it's a traumatic experience in a way, in some ways, like and so being able to prepare for that is, so important. But then it's like we don't think about what happens after sometimes because we don't know what to expect. So
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's so eye-opening to hear it like, from firsthand because I know that definitely, changed your perspective and your outlook when you were onto, having Sloane too.
It did. Yeah. And it actually really colored what I was going to do this time around.
Yeah.
Or like the second time around, right? Because
Yeah.
it was just it was more isolating than I ever thought it was going to be. I even remember I'm not a very religious person, but I remember just like Googling like, should I go to church to meet other families? Like, because you're just like trying to find a community, right? Just like, is there a
Yeah.
community somewhere? And all I could think of was like, oh, these, churches, people have kids at church, right?
Yeah. You're like, I just want people to relate to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so again, like Peanut was great, but then, I had my 10 weeks and then all of a sudden it was like, okay, now I have to go back to work. right?
Yeah.
My benefits and, the benefits are ending. And at the time, I only got paid, I think it was like 75% of the salary or something like that. They stopped all my benefits of like bonuses, things like that. Like all of that was like put on pause almost or hold.
Interesting.
Yeah. So again, I was like on disability leave. I get partial pay. They paused things for me. I still got my benefits, right? But I had to pay for them out of my paycheck, right? So fine, again, like very privileged to be able to have that, right? I know that
Right.
there are lots of mothers who don't get that same thing. So at the time it was great, right, to have that, but just to know that, hey, they're putting me on this like weird pause. And I remember my boss before I left saying to me, and again, like I almost cried about it before I left, but he was like, just so that you know, like you may not have a position coming back. And I was like, what? Like,
What?
what is this? Right. And he's like, this is a new organization that we're trying to set up. We're hiring people, we're going to try our best to keep your spot. So I kind of had this weird anxiety lingering in the background, right? I've got this like, I'm trying to just focus on like, I was in some physical pain at the end, like just getting through postpartum. And then I, returning to work, like, what the heck does this look like? Right. So I remember, I think my doula gave me a little kind of like pump schedule, and here's what to expect for pumping, and
Yep.
had my breast pump and all the things. And, I go back.
Okay, so my laptop totally just crashed on us, you guys. I have no idea what just happened and it just turned off. But so if this makes a weird edit, there we go. But anyways, so you were saying how she gave you a pump schedule and you were heading back to
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. So I go back, and if, so first of all, you have this like almost identity crisis, right? On
Right.
the one hand, I remember I was like, I'm this working professional. This is all that I care about at the time, right? Like before kids, right? It's like,
Right.
I
That was
care
your
about
life.
climbing the ladder. This is my thing. I come back and now I have to deal with like daycare, sickness. Do I have time off to do this? Right. I have to pump because, again, at the time, I was like, I'm never using formula. That was like my thing. Like, I'm gonna breastfeed him for like the whole year. So I'll get to that. But I was like, I have to do this. It's like the best, food for the baby, blah, blah, blah. Um, so I get in, and like, first of all, my brain was just mush, right? I'm just like, I remember sitting in front of my laptop being like, what am I supposed to do? Right. Like I have this baby. I'm like on my phone, hoping that they're going to post pictures on the app of my kid. Cause, he was barely 3 months old at the time. I drop him off. I remember just like crying at the daycare. Luckily, I saw some people that I had worked with at a previous company that had their kids there, and they had a little girl around his age. So I felt better.
Mhm.
But, here I am at work in the office, and everyone's like, are you okay? How is everything? I think a lot of the men just like didn't know how to respond right to
Right.
this situation, because I think a lot of them had wives that were either not working, or maybe they had kids like 20 years ago because they were like older.
Right.
And it was very different back then, right? So I remember going into my boss's office and just being like, okay, I'm back. And I remember him going, I wasn't expecting you to come back this early. And I was like, what?
What do you mean?
Yeah. And he's like, yeah, I don't even think about like what I should have you do now. Why don't you just go back to your desk, and then we'll talk about it tomorrow. And I was like, okay, this is interesting, right? So again, here I am, this planner. What am I supposed to do, right?
Right.
And so I remember talking to some of my colleagues, trying to see if I could get back on some of the projects that I was working on before I went out. And so I did do some of that, right? But my boss was kind of blocking me from some of these projects, because he's like, well, this isn't something I want you to work on. I want you to work on this, etc. And I remember just struggling, right? It was like, here I am, I have to, schedule time in my calendar to take a pump break. I had to walk, like, again, I was working in this big office. There's one pump room that we shared with like, I think 10 women, and you had to schedule the pump room. Okay. And if you didn't get your spot, you may have had to wait 2 hours to pump, right? So here I am, like super full, almost crying because it's hurting me, right? Because it's like 3 months, right? Your milk supply is still
Your
kind of
milk's, yeah, it's
regulating.
regulating.
And again, I didn't really know that
Right.
until later because again, like I met moms who were pumping and we were talking through it.
Mm-hmm.
But I just remember agonizing over this. Like I don't have a project to do. I'm not really like making way in the workplace like I used to. So and now I also have this, because again, he was born in the summer, it was getting to be fall, like winter sickness time. Now, you get calls like, oh my gosh, he has a fever, you have to take him in. Like, what do we do? So it's like navigating all of this, like the pediatrician, pumping, all of these things. And I just remember, I gave it the good college try for like 3 months. And I went into my boss like multiple times and I was like, look, I'm not making a difference here. And he's like, well, you just had a baby. I'm not expecting you to do much. It was kind of this like condescending thing of like, you should take it easy and work like, part-time. Like no one's gonna bat an eye if you don't do anything. Like kind of was what he said to me. And I
Interesting.
remember I remember going back to my husband and just being like, how can this be? Right. Like I still like I want to work. I want to show my kids, right, that you can work and be a mom. And yeah, it's hard. But I kind of knew at the 3 month mark that this place wasn't going to be for me anymore. Right.
Right.
And I remember because again, like it was a great salary, they had great benefits. Can I say that? I'm going to say the workplace. I was working at Amazon.
Yeah.
Okay. And I was like, awesome, like they gave you all these stock options, like the restricted stock units and like all these things. And it's like so much money, right? And you're just like, okay, how can I give that up? Right. So
Right.
months roll around and again, I'm trying really hard. I keep getting blocked. They had hired another woman in who was kind of doing what I was doing before. It just felt like I was like cast aside, right? It was
Yeah.
like,
Getting kind of pushed out for sure.
yeah. Yeah, and I remember one of the gentlemen on the team, he was like he had I think 3 kids, a set of twins and like a single kid, I don't know how to say it. Um and he was like, yeah, like let me know if you need any help. But again, it's like all these empty promises, right? Because I was like, I need help, but I don't know how to ask you for help. I don't even know what I need, right?
Right.
Like so again, like I just navigated through that, knew at 3 months I had to look for something else, tried to give it another couple months. And at 6 months, I was like, I have to start looking for something else.
Yeah.
So, again, like pumping at work was like probably the hardest thing I ever had to do. I had never been so physically tired in my life. I remember often getting clogged ducts.
Hmm.
And it's so painful to get a clogged duct. There were multiple times where I was in a bathroom stall, literally sobbing. Okay. And again, there are not a lot of women that worked at that place
Hmm.
at the time, who had children. The
Hmm.
people who worked there were either like older women or they were like, young women that maybe weren't married or like weren't looking to have babies and things like that. And I just remember like somebody kind of looking underneath the stall and being like, are you okay? And I was like, no. And then they left the bathroom. And I just remember being like, this is seriously the worst workplace ever. Like how is this? Like it was almost like the culture of that workplace. They didn't know what to do with
Right.
new moms. And I remember seeing another mom who had actually, she was instrumental in getting the pump room up and running. She had a similar experience. So her and I had lunch and she goes, look, I'm leaving Amazon. Like I can't stay here. My boss basically put me on this non-project because he didn't think that I could do the job. And she was like, I'm tired of these men ruling everything. I can't do this anymore. So she
Hmm.
she left and I was like, okay, that is my red flag. Like
Right. You're like, let's do
among other
it.
things, right? So I remember like looking for other jobs, I'm like on LinkedIn, like searching. I was gonna have an interview. We were almost gonna move out to San Francisco, honestly. Like I was like, oh, I should like move out to San Francisco. But again, like, you know, to me, I was like at this crossroads of I'm still this working professional. Like I want to do well. Maybe I just have to leave the area, right? But again, like that would just been let's explode everything, right?
Right.
But I was desperate, or do I stay here and like, try to find a job, around local, right? Because before I had Owen, I was like going into Cambridge and doing jobs. I was like going to Waltham and doing jobs, like hours away from where I lived. And you can't sit in a car for 2.5 hours. Well, you could, but you'd have to
No
have
one
all this
wants to.
support and yeah. And so finally I was like, all right, I tried. I can't do this anymore. So I was like hitting it hard. I ended up finding this like startup company um, called Alert Innovation. And I was a little bit afraid to work at a startup because I was like, okay, I worked at this Amazon place who were supposed to have great maternity benefits and great, return to work packages, but I was treated kind of like dirt. I don't want to do this again. So I remember going because my husband had worked in startups a lot and it's a big gamble, right? It's like you
Hmm.
work really hard, like what do you do? This is like 2018, 2019 timeframe, probably right before the pandemic, right?
Right.
But again, nobody knew that. So um, I interviewed with this company, and I remember my husband saying, well, why don't you take a risk this time? It seems like maybe that would like help you like mentally, because again, I was in this dark place. I remember I have this like mirror. I'm like pointing to it over here. I had these little affirmations on the sides of my mirror because I was so depressed, right? I had gone from like I was rocking work to this like like how do I even navigate this to like being cast aside? And I had these affirmations that were like, you matter, like things like that because I
Yeah.
just needed to see it every day because I was just in this like dark hole. Like obviously I love my kid and I love watching him grow up and it was great, but I also wanted to work, right? I didn't want to stop.
Right.
So, decided I'm going to take this risk. I remember, I think Owen was 10 months old at that point. It was like May of 2019. Um, I was still breastfeeding him. And this place did not have a pump room. I remember going into the interview and I didn't even want to tell them I was pregnant or I had a baby
Yeah.
because I was so afraid that I wouldn't get the job, that I wasn't going to like have a place there, etc. So I didn't even mention my personal life at all. I didn't, I have this 10-month-old and I remember getting the tour and I was like, okay, there's no conference rooms. It's this big open environment. Am I supposed to pump in the bathroom? Like, what am I going to do? And I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm gonna have to just wean him because I kind of want to work here and take this risk and like figure out, what to do. So long story short, I get the job, I go in, and I remember talking to some of the HR professionals and they were talking about their kids. And I remember at the time too, I was like reading articles about women going back to the workplace. And I was like, the only way that this is gonna be good for others after me is if it's visible, right?
Yeah.
And so I printed off all these pictures of my baby and I posted them like all over my cubicle. And I was like, look, I'm gonna put it out there and be like, I'm a working mom. I'm gonna try this. This is my risk, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm gonna see if this is okay. And so my boss at the time, right around the same age as me, we were both like really ambitious people. She was like, "Oh, why didn't you tell us that you had a baby?" And I said, quite frankly, because I was scared and I had a horrible experience like coming back in. And she goes, "Well, we could have navigated that for you. Like, there's only less than 100 people that work here. Like we would have helped you." And I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Right? To hear the words, like we would have helped you. It
Yeah.
was just this amazing thing opened up, and I was like, "Okay, maybe I need to stay here for a little bit." So again, like, get through. I weaned Owen. He was like on formula. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm just gonna like try this. Um, I ended up working, I still work there today, actually. Well, we merged with Walmart now, but it was actually a great workplace to kind of like grow up in as a startup. I had pretty understanding bosses. They were very flexible. It was kind of like what I needed at the time, right? It somehow the stars aligned again, thank goodness, and gave me this like flexibility and everything else, right? So it was good. I was coming in, I was kind of like rocking it. I felt like I could sort of do both things. I wasn't like excelling, but I was attempting, right? And then the pandemic hit, right? And it was like this whole navigating of like, what do we do? And for my husband and I, we did want a second child, right? We just and I had in my head this vision of like, I think I'm going to have them 2 years apart.
Yeah.
But it was like 2018, 2020. I was like, no way in hell am I navigating the medical system during a pandemic. I don't even know what's going to happen if I get,
Yeah.
coronavirus and all the things.
There's
So we
too many
waited.
unknowns.
Yeah. Yeah. So we waited. Um, and so between the two of them, I think it was like 2021 or 2022 when things were kind of easing up. We were kind of like trying. I had a miscarriage, which I took pretty hard, actually. I was like, oh my God, maybe I'm never gonna have kids again. Like I just maybe it was over dramatic, but it was like it was a lot. Like I was just like, I don't even know, what to do with this, right? And so my thought was like, well, maybe it's just not meant to be. We can just be like one and done parents. It'll be easier for us to navigate. I'm getting older, right? Things like that. And then yeah, we just again, I was kind of afraid to try after that again. And the gap between kids was getting longer, and my thought was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be hard. What do I do? Um, and then my company merged, and I kind of had this like, oh my God, if I have another kid, because I was pregnant when we merged, essentially, am I going to come back to this like mess of whatever?
Right.
And again, I haven't come back yet, so to be determined. But um, regardless, like it felt more supportive coming in. I felt safer after kind of like the COVID restrictions were ending.
Yeah.
And I got pregnant, and it was like June. Yeah, when I found out of like 2022. And so there were still COVID restrictions. I remember going into the OB, and they have the signs up everywhere of like,
Yeah.
you can only have one support person, blah, 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 all the things. And so this time around, I had taken all the learnings of like, I don't want to be isolated. I want to ask for help. I'm going to ask for help. I don't care, right?
Right.
Type of attitude. And so again, like I think relief parenting had started in 2018, right after I had my son. And a friend of mine was like, look at this link. And I checked it out, and I was like, wow, I wish I would have known about this when I was postpartum, right?
Right.
Like to have someone, you know, the idea of like a nap room or a respite room that they had,
Yeah.
right? It's like that's amazing. Like if I would have known that that was in existence at the time, I
Right.
would have gone and done all the things. But I felt like coming out of that first pregnancy of just like it was hard to re-enter. I didn't have the help. I was afraid to ask for it, except for like my family, right? This time around, I was like, I'm asking for it all. Like, so I found relief. I found you guys, right? I found you. I was like,
I
what am
know.
I gonna do with my son, right?
Right.
Because again, like pregnancy, you never know when you're gonna go into labor, right?
Yep.
Am I gonna have like how do I get somebody on call to like help and just in case? And I found out that there's like a birth doula, and I thought that was awesome. And so I signed up for all the things this time around. I did massages again, and this time around, Massachusetts, I think in 2020 did the whole paid family medical leave and all the things. And so I remember researching, and at the time, this was like prior to us merging. They were like, "Oh, you're going to get the full benefits, like your full pay. You won't pause your, bonuses and all the things." And it felt like people were learning more about like how to help mothers, like from
Yeah.
2018 to like even just in like 3 years, right? Just like how to do this. And I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna take advantage of it, right? If I get 10 week, I get like 5 months, I'm taking 5 months, right? I'm taking it. So, I had to kind of navigate like going from what alert my previous company was providing to what Walmart would provide. And Walmart actually revamped all of their benefits recently. So I kind of had to go through this whole like HR churn of what do I get? Like, do I get something like, because like I think what they're trying to do now is like some companies anyway, before you have the baby, give you like a month of time to just like, you know, have the end of pregnancy.
Yeah.
It's like 10 weeks or so, which is what I got of like a medical leave, just like the postpartum period, and then bonding. And so having kind of like those three packages was like a really, it was amazing just to have all of that, right? Because, we were flexible. We had some, more like flex PTO, so I could
Hmm.
take time off ahead of having Sloane, which I did because towards the end of having Sloane, I was pretty anemic and I was actually getting like iron infusions and I was so weak and I couldn't drive because um, I I would get like these episodes almost of like I was gonna faint and oh my God.
Mm.
So I was kind of isolated into like my house and which was fine. Like I didn't really mind it very much just because I was like physically exhausted. But having the ability to just take that time off ahead of time, ahead of having her, resting, etc., was great. So I had that. I got the birth doula, I got the postpartum doula. And just having that all in place felt better to me, right? So, fast forward to the pregnancy, so or the birth, excuse me. So with her, I don't know why I had this thing in my mind where I was like, she's coming early. Like I thought she was gonna come early.
Oh, I
And
remember.
and I was like, all right, I had like some false labor. And again, I never had this with Owen, so I didn't know what to expect. So
Right.
I was always talking to you guys like, okay, I think she's coming. Like this is
Yeah.
happening. It took off. At one point, they were going to induce me because I had like high water. I get in on the day of the induction. They do some more tests. They send me home. It was just this anticipation, right, of like, is she
Yeah.
what's happening? So coincidentally, she was also 6 days after her due date. Very interesting.
Hmm.
Um, again, like towards the end, I was like, she's not coming. She's going to be late. I was just like laying in bed. My water broke at home again. Again, very interesting that they were both sort of the same. This time around, it was weird. I felt it break. Like she did some kind of adjusting, like inside, and I felt almost like felt her pop it. It was very
She like
strange.
kicked it open. She was like,
Yeah,
I'm out now, guys.
yeah. And I remember like before she came, it was like the day she came, I went into the hospital. They did some tests. They're like, doesn't look like you're doing any kind of contracting and you're not even dilated. And I was like, oh, good. And I remember this nurse came in because I think there was like I was with the OB on call and she goes, the baby boy's coming. And I'm like, what? So there was like another boy that was getting born at the same time.
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
in the hospital like crying. Like when is
You're like,
Sloane coming?
just take her.
But I ended up having them do like a membrane sweep, which again, I learned this was a thing I didn't know with Owen just because I don't know. And so they swept the membranes and that night water broke and within 2 hours I had her. It was the craziest experience ever.
It was
Um,
wild. It was wild. I remember, so I was on call as Kara's sibling doula support. So I was going to go hang out with Owen. And I remember, all of my clients at the time knew that I was on call. And so they knew that, like, if I'm with you and I get a text message, like I have to leave. And I knew my house from your house is like just under an hour, 45 minutes or so. And I
right.
remember I was in a town that was actually closer to you with like a babysitting client. And they were like, we'll be home in 15. And I actually ended up getting there faster than I probably would have if I was even coming from my own house. And
Yeah.
even still, Alyssa, your
Yeah.
birth doula, went to the house and was with Owen and
Right.
barely made it to the birth for when I got to the house. It was crazy. I mean, we all knew she
Yeah.
was going to come fast because she was on her own timeline, but geez Louise.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I remember Eric because we were expecting it to go slower because the first
Right.
time was slow or it felt slow. I mean it was slow. But I remember, I'm like sitting at the side of my bed, like there's water still gushing out, right, at every contraction. And I'm like on my hands and knees and I'm like, I need you to call like just like trying to put, and
Yeah.
Eric is like, well, I'm gonna make some coffee. And I'm just like, you can't make coffee, like we have to go. And he kind of was on his own timeline as well. But luckily, like Alyssa came. She almost missed the very first part of the birth as well, which was insane. But I get
Gosh.
to the hospital. Eric, we had to go in through the emergency room entrance. This was like Ann and Jake's, just because I think it was like after hours.
Yep.
Eric wheelchairs me in because I can't really walk at this point. And I remember because it was still like you had to mask or whatever,
Yep.
right? And he stops me right in front of like the ER where there's like a bunch of patients waiting and they're all masked and I'm like, and the receptionist or the
Yep. Yep.
triage
Yep.
person was like, do you need to go to labor and delivery? And I was like, yes. And
You're like right
she like
now.
wheels me up. We just barely get in. The OB is like, um, or she was like the PA or whatever. She's like, do you feel pressure? And I was like, yes. And they check me and she's like, I can feel the head. And then all of a sudden it was just like, I think Eric showed up and then all of a sudden Alyssa was there, but I was pushing right when they were there because I just felt like I had to. But
Right.
this time around, um, as weird as it is, it felt easier. It was like my body knew what to do. Having it be faster, I wasn't as tired.
Mm-hmm.
I remember feeling so much better afterwards. I was in the hospital for a day, I think, and then I
Yeah.
came home like after. I knew I had this like longer maternity leave, and I was actually excited about having that just because of like last time. We had a better support network this time around too, just because I had you, I knew I could like bring people in like
Yeah.
as a doula after to like help take care of her. And um, I did all the things because I just remember the first time around, it felt so traumatic.
Yeah.
But it helped too with the company that I was in. Like when I got pregnant, people were like very supportive and everything else. And this time around too, like my return to work, I'm a little bit higher up in the company. I have like direct reports. A lot of them, I have some women that work for me, which gets me very excited.
Yay.
Working as like an engineer in the tech industry, there you don't really see a lot of that, but I'm seeing more of it, which makes me excited. So this time around, my mindset was like, I'm taking all the benefits. I want to model kind of like what this looks like. I want to model like better a return to work, which like previous with Owen, previously it was kind of this like, I'm going to expect that my manager tells me what to do. This is more of like I'm going to come in and I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do type of situation, right?
Yeah.
Because of just kind of the trauma around re-entry last time. But this time around, I've stayed in touch with coworkers. They're kind of telling me like what's happening. I have like a plan I've put together to return to work. So I feel a lot better about coming back in. Um, I'm actually one of two people in the company who's ever had a baby there because we're small, like we're growing,
Yeah.
but a lot of people who work there are either same situation, like either younger, maybe not married, or they're like older and they have like grown children who are just out
Right.
of so this time around I have to navigate like professionally this merger. We went from a small company to being merged with a Walmart of the world, right? To kind of figure out what the heck that looks like. My boss has changed since then, but I've been reaching out to this person. And this time around, my boss actually has a new baby at home. He has an 8-month-old at home. So it feels like it's going to be more manageable this time around. And
Yeah.
I can't tell if it's just because, I have a support system now. I learned from like what happened before, where it was just like surprise, surprise, like I'm isolated to this. Now I'm going to ask for the help type of
Right.
thing. But it it feels better. And just I didn't have as long of a recovery period with Sloane. Um, I knew what to expect when it, with breastfeeding and things like that. And um, it feels like it's going to be easier. I haven't gone
Yeah.
through it yet, but I am
Right. We'll
planning
have to
to.
do a check back episode. You'll have to let us know.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now I ask everybody this question, but I would love to know your
Sure.
answer. if you could talk to a new parent and you could suggest something to them, like one product recommendation and one like piece of advice, what kind of advice and like what products do you feel like you wish you knew about that you would share with others?
Yeah. So in terms of advice, like I've been saying, I think just ask for the help. For me, that was a really hard thing to do. And if you're not versed in it, it can be hard.
Yeah.
But ask for the help, right? Like have someone come clean your house, right? Like I know that's crazy, but just like having somebody do that, if you can manage it, is great. And when people ask you what you need or how you're doing, tell them.
Right.
Tell them what's happening, right? Because I know with my first, it was a lot of like, I'm fine, type of responses that I gave to them.
Yeah.
If you're not fine, say something, right? Or, a friend of mine was like, what can I do? I'm like, can you get me a coffee? Here's my coffee, order. And just being direct like that, I think helps people help you, right?
Yeah.
And just knowing that this time around and being able to do that for myself was like mentally and emotionally like what I needed at this time of my life, I guess.
Right.
So yeah, ask for help. That is my biggest piece of advice. And be specific, right? If you need toilet paper, ask for toilet paper because I think
Right.
people want to help you. I just
Yeah.
think that they don't know how, right?
Right.
It just comes down to like, I sent you a text message, that's my way of helping. But if you need anything, like ask for it, right?
Yeah. And I think it's like if roles were reversed, like if you were asking somebody and they told you something specific, you'd probably feel better that they asked for something specific than trying to kind of guess what they wanted. So, you
Right.
know, being able to say what you need and what you want, like just the way that you hope other people would do for vice versa. Yeah.
Right.
And then what would one product be? Do you have a go-to product?
It's interesting. I was thinking about it before. The only thing I would say is like get a really good stroller
Mm,
because I don't have like a specific one in mind, but I know for me, like I got a jogging stroller because one way of like therapy for me is just getting outside every day. And I still
yep.
do it now with Sloane is I will get up even if it's hot at like 6 o'clock in the morning and walk. So buy a good stroller that'll last you through. I had one from, Owen. So I had like a nice, I think it's a Graco stroller, but again, like if you can buy the jogging stroller because it goes through, like trails and stuff,
Yeah.
just having a nice stroller that you can bring around with you and just walk every day really was my therapy, honestly.
Yes,
So
yes. No, that's such a good one. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I think it's so great. I've had obviously a handful of birth and postpartum stories, but I think it's so cool to see and like have you on, not only for the fact that like I feel like your births were like almost total opposites in a way of like speed
yeah,
and
yeah,
how it all went, but also like being able to hear like the work side of things, because a lot of people that I've had on thus far haven't talked about the work side of things, and I think it's something that's so relatable and can be super anxiety provoking, so I think it'll help a lot of people, so I appreciate it.
yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.